Hi, welcome. Today, instead of sharing a pattern, we're going to be talking about scissors and paper types, paper punches, and we're also going to be doing a little bit of freehand cutting. Just as we were going through the video and I was showing you how to cut out snowflakes on the box folding template, I realized that you're really going to need to start looking into some thinner paper. So as you advance your skills in snowflake cutting, you're going to need to start using some thinner paper, and actually the thinner paper can help you as a beginner as well because it'll be a little easier to cut through. So this weekend we were doing one of our family traditions of cutting out snowflakes, and my daughter had been using mostly the wrapping paper ones, and then she started using one of the 20-pound copy paper folded pieces of paper, and she was like, is this cardstock? This is so hard to cut through. There really is quite a big difference since it is 12 layers. So we're going to be talking about the different paper types today and hopefully help you as you're finding different sources of paper, different things that you can use as you continue to advance your skills. So one thing I want to point out, we're going to go ahead and talk about paper punches as well, and you can always use a spare piece of paper or a little piece left over from making a snowflake to test your punch. Now hopefully it'll punch all the way cleanly and not leave any little pieces of paper hanging, not make a ragged cut, but that's a good way to check. And you also want to make sure that you empty your confetti catcher frequently, or else especially if you're going through like 20-pound copy paper through all 12 layers and you're pushing and it's already full, you'll actually bend your paper punch. So the first thing we're actually going to do, I'm going to line these two up, and I'm going to show you the difference in the centers because we can't ignore the fact that the folds go over 12 layers, and so it does affect them. The thickness of the paper does affect your finished product. I'll have to get that one off the floor later, but we're also going to use the same one so that we get at least close to the same size of interior snowflake. Just so that we can do a comparison. That center just tends to be what kind of tattletales on you if you've not folded quite correctly, or if you're using really thick paper, you can usually really tell in the center. Go ahead and open up our centers just so we can do a comparison of what they look like. Hopefully they're close to the same size. Just trying to have a fair comparison here of the different paper types and the difference you might get in the center. And the smaller your center is, the more noticeable it is, especially on the steepness of the fold. There is just a slight difference. I'm mostly seeing it in the larger snowflake where these 2 points are just a little bit less tall than the other ones. It's just due to the thickness of the paper. So that green is actually a nice bright red on the inside. So let me tell you about these different paper types. So the first one is the 20-pound copy paper, and this is the one we'll be using when I have you print out a box folding template. I think it's only fair that I also use the same material and use the 20-pound standard copy paper. It does show a little bit of a difference here with the points, and if you looked closely at these other ones you would still be able to see a slight difference, but it is a little bit easier with the thinner paper to not show the difference in the size, and if it doesn't matter to you at all, don't worry about it, but it's also easier on your hands to use some of these thinner papers. So this blue paper is actually some blue wrapping paper. I got that at the dollar store, so it's fairly inexpensive, especially if you want like a rustic look. You can use some newspaper. And then the origami paper also folds really well, and it's thinner, so it's easier to cut through. So with scissors as well, we have to consider whether or not they'll be capable of cutting through the paper, and also how hard that is on both our tools and our hands. So we're going to do a little bit of freehand cutting here, and I just suggest, especially for beginners, that you try this little trick where you just start out on one side and kind of wander with your scissors. Just practice your advanced cutting skills of turning the paper. Just to kind of get used to the feel of cutting, but also this is a good way to test which materials you prefer to use. So I'll go ahead and open this one up. Now I definitely wouldn't use my smaller scissors on this 20-pound copy paper just because it would be hard on my hands, and I just like to use the bigger scissors so I can get a little bit more force on my cuts. Physics lessons come in good there with the different leverage. Okay, so there's the first one. And then the second one. So now that we're down to this thinner paper, I'm more comfortable using these smaller scissors. Now I often like to still use the large scissors when I'm doing long straight lines so that I don't have to keep kind of gumming at the paper. But for turns especially, I find that these little scissors work really well. Now this paper is a little bit more slick, so the layers don't stay together perhaps as well as the other layers did with the 20-pound copy paper. But I am able, especially with these smaller scissors, to get tighter turns. You might notice a little bit as I turn, if I'm not too careful, I get a little bit of it kind of scratches off the top layer of color. I get a little bit of white showing through on the color. Now if you're using white wrapping paper, that probably won't bother you, but if you are using a colored paper, you'll want to pay attention to how even the color is affected by what tool you're using, because sometimes it will kind of scratch off a little bit of the color. Now sometimes people are tempted to use colored construction paper. That's kind of the standard paper that you have in classrooms. That often is really hard to cut through even with the larger scissors. You kind of feel like you're just gumming through the paper. It's very light and airy, but it's hard to get like a precise cut through 12 layers of the paper. Okay, and then we'll go ahead and do the newspaper. Now newspaper, you can often find end rolls for free from a printing service, but sometimes they do charge for those, so just ask around and find out what's available in your area. It's definitely a good way to recycle, and some people prefer the look. So go with what you like to do, and of course I am encouraging you to recycle and reuse different papers. Okay, and then last we're going to go ahead and use the origami paper. This one does feel a little bit thicker than the wrapping paper and the newspaper that I just did. Still much thinner than the 20-pound copy paper. And again, I'm noticing that as I turn, I'm losing a little bit of color, and that probably will just company to company, that will probably vary, so you'll just need to pay attention to that if it bothers you. If you're using white paper, you might not even notice that it's happening. But sometimes the colored paper shows up a lot, that you're kind of scratching off your color as you're making the turns. Now I do want to point out that these are actually paper cutting scissors, not fabric scissors. If you have a quilter or a fabric artist in your life, do not use their fabric scissors for paper. It'll dull the blade and they will not be happy with you. So if you want to keep them happy, please do not use fabric scissors on paper. And there's that one. So also, I know I've told you before, I like to play around with the leftover pieces. So anytime you have two folds on both sides of the paper, you can make another snowflake. Now I know that this paper is a little bit slick, so I'm going to go ahead and use a paper clip to hold it together. As you can see, even as I put the paper clip on, it shifted. So that's another thing to be paying attention to when you're choosing your paper, is how much it shifts, the slickness, and how much you can tolerate that as So one more thing that we've talked about a little bit is just using the leftover pieces. If you still have folds on both sides of the folded piece of paper, you can make an additional snowflake. So we're going to go ahead and try that with this one. Now we did find when we were putting them up on the windows this weekend that the ones made from the 20-pound copy paper are easier to get up on the window to glue without it being distorted. And I think that's just due to the thickness of the paper again. So what's a weakness when it comes to cutting out is a strength when it comes to putting up on the window. So it depends what you want. What you're looking for, what you're planning to use the snowflakes as, if you're planning to use them glued to a window, if you're planning to have them more as a doily under a picture or under a table setting, that kind of thing. So I'm also going to go ahead and make one with the wrapping paper, just a second outer 2-in-1. And I will put these on the scanner in a minute so that they can be included in the video and you can see them a little better. I know we're getting a little cluttered here today. My children were the ones that started pulling things out of the scrap pile and using it for additional snowflakes, so they were the ones that showed me the potential for what I was just going to recycle. Thank you for watching.